let's talk about ensembles. Woo! If you write a story with a lot of characters, that's called an ensemble. This is an extremely common storytelling technique, especially in video games. So, as an example, Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball has a main character, Goku, but what gives Dragon Ball its power is the ensemble, the rest of the characters, large and small, that show up on any given day. So today it's Goku and who? Vegeta and Krillin and the Ginyu Force and how about Bulma? How about Mr. Satan? Whoever we want, right? Each of these characters is distinct and flavorful. So the writers can get any flavor they want by mixing and matching who shows up at any given moment. That is the power of an ensemble. As a simple example, Bulma. Bulma showed up today. She showed up with who? Well, she showed up with Krillin. Bulma and Krillin are a very specific dynamic. The dynamic immediately suggests itself. It plays out very strongly. You know exactly the tone you're going to get if Bulma and Krillin are interacting with each other. How about Bulma and Vegeta? Completely different dynamic, but again, it immediately suggests itself. How about Bulma and Mr. Satan? Again, a new dynamic, a new flavor that immediately suggests itself. And in the case where we can't get the flavor we want, we can't figure out which combination of characters would create this flavor, we can just add a new character to the ensemble. Because it's not super tightly limited. It's not like we have to have every character play a very specific role in our story. They're just there to make sure that our story unfolds in a fun way. So we can just add a new character. Do we not have a bad boy in our ensemble? Did we accidentally Flanderize our bad boy? Let's put in a new bad boy. Rewind, find that space prince, stick him in, now we've got a bad boy. So that is the power of an ensemble. And this is an extremely powerful storytelling technique if you have loose stories to tell. The tighter your story is, the less important an ensemble is because each character plays a very, very specific role in a tighter story. But the looser your story is, the more important it is to have an ensemble because those are like flavors that you can add into today's dish. When it comes to video games, nearly every story-based video game or video game with a story is an ensemble piece. Every CRPG, every military shooter, every walking simulator, 99% of these games are ensemble games. As an example, Mass Effect. In Mass Effect, you play Commander Shepard, and you have, 6 or so members of your crew on board your ship. Well, those are your main ensemble, and you can also include secondary characters in this, but we'll stick to just the main 6 or whatever that can go in your party. And you can put any 2 of them in your party. This is a very typical ensemble setup for a CRPG. It is still working in exactly the same way today. It's in this game, in Dragon Age, and Baldur's Gate, and every other CRPG. This is the standard, right? You have a set of characters that you can put in your party. Each of these characters brings their own flavor to the table. And in scripted plot sequences, the linear parts of the game, specific characters are required. Specific characters will be there to tell the story because you need those characters to get the flavor you want to tell. So if you're doing the cop story on the Citadel, you have to bring the cop Turian because he's the one with opinions on that stuff. But the problem with the video game ensemble is recombinatorial math. You see, if the player is allowed to choose any 2 of their 6 characters to bring along, you have to write 30 times as much dialogue. Because that's 6 times 5, that's 30. So you are going to have to write 30 times as much stuff if you want to let the player bring any 2 characters along, which means that your only real option is to write 30 times less. Like, the basic level of dialogue and interaction has to be 1/30th of what it would otherwise be, because you have to write 30 times as much. So in order to make that even out, you have to write it 30 times smaller. And this is why, whenever you go out on a mission with 2 characters of your choice, they don't really do anything. They don't have any flavor. They're 1/30th as flavorful as they would be if this was a story mission where they were mandatory. That's just the nature of recombinatorial math. And the more characters you have that can go on your party, the worse it gets. Now, obviously, you can throw money at this and try to resolve it just by purely writing more stuff, but even then you're going to be limited to the structure that is defined by the adventure you're on. Unless the adventure itself unfolds in 30 different ways, you're not going to be able to write 30 different equally moving new flavors because they have to fit into the exact same structural box. You fight the same enemies at the same pace. You find the same loot and fight the same boss. And that's not going to make nearly as powerful a statement as if you could manually create 30 different dungeons for every single combination of characters. What this means is that every single video game ensemble is going to be all about you and the character. It's always going to be the player and the character. Never two characters from the ensemble interacting. Always you interacting. And you can see this with Mass Effect and any other game that has this setup. If you were to pick any two of the characters, you would find that they don't generally have an immediate response. There's no immediate, obvious dynamic that would create. Like Bulma and Vegeta, or Bulma and Krillin, or Bulma and Mr. Satan, you can immediately see the dynamic that would emerge. But if you were to get like, Rex and for some reason I keep calling her Talia. It's not. It's one of the other characters, the blue-skinned lady. If you were to get them on the screen at the same time, there's no immediate interaction that suggests itself, because they're not really built to interact with each other. They're built to interact with you, the player. This works, but it means that we can't mix and match flavors. All we can do is get a full-on faceful of one flavor. That really removes a lot of the nuance from the story. And to make matters worse, because they can only interact with us, we often bracket them and put them into pigeonholes where all that matters is that they're interacting with us. And by doing that, we remove the flavor of the interaction. As an example of that, if we have 6 people on our spaceship or at our camp or whatever, there will always be a moment where we go back to camp or we go back to spaceship and we do the rounds and talk to them all and get the next beat of their very sad backstory that they want to tell us now. Every single time, in every single CRPG, this is the same setup. The characters sit around at home camp, and then they tell you about their sad backstory at some point. The problem is, even though all of these characters have their own distinct flavors when they appear doing things in the world, they all have the same flavor if they're sitting at camp telling woeful backstories to you because you've finished their most recent loyalty quest. We've removed the flavor from these characters. Now, to some extent, you can try and re-inject that flavor by having the narrated story they're telling you contain it, but you're taking it out of the context of it existing and putting it into the context of they are talking about it. It's no longer being shown to you, it's now being told to you. That's not nearly the same. I would much prefer to eat a cookie rather than being told how a cookie tastes. This setup really limits us. It really forces everything to fit into the same mold, which removes the ability of these characters to shine. So not only can these characters not interact with each other in unique ways, but because we've locked these interactions down into one specific pigeonhole, they can't even express themselves by how they interact with us anymore. We've completely removed all uniqueness from these characters, these ensembles. This is a common problem when you're building ensembles. You end up with an ensemble that feels like the same character over and over and over and over and over, and you have to really go deep to try and find something that makes these characters feel distinct and feel worth looking at. Normally, it's just skin deep. Like, oh, look, that's the pretty one and that's the handsome one. Which one do you prefer? How exciting a choice. Do they have personalities? No, they just want to tell me their sad backstories? Great. I think that there are other ways to use ensembles in video games, and I'd like to discuss this in some detail. I'd like to discuss ensembles how to create them, how to use them, some practical examples of games that already exist, some theoretical examples of how we might do it in the future. I think that this is an important technique to understand because it is a foundational technique in video game stories specifically, and the way those stories unfold is different from how ensembles work in linear media. Also, it's frequently not done at all. Like, there are so many indie games where there are technically an ensemble of characters, but then they never actually perform in any way that would help. It's just a whole bunch of OCs, do not steal, that don't end up doing anything. And I think that if we discuss how to use an ensemble, how to build an ensemble, we might be able to sort of lay the groundwork for how to create ensemble stories for video games that really leverage those characters instead of letting them languish. That's the theory. So this was ensemble number 1, and in the next episode we'll discuss how to build some ensembles, because why not? See you around.